Welcome back to the series on the WebSphere application server. This session is going to be all around security. I'm very excited to have our first guest speaker, Keith Botham, a senior technical staff member and subject matter expert at IBM on security. Keith, it is a real pleasure having you here, and I really appreciate the time you're taking today to spend here to discuss this topic with us, especially since I am by no means a security expert.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm actually kind of looking forward to it.
Oh, fabulous. So, Keith, I travel all around the world meeting with various customers about application infrastructures, looking at all sorts of different options, including commercial, open source, and a combination of that. And, to my amazement and surprise, security oftentimes seems just to be an afterthought to many of these corporations. Can you give us kind of like your background in security and why you think this should be on the forefront of everyone's minds in IT?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As far as my background, I think it's kind of convoluted like everyone's is. But basically, I don't really consider myself to be a pure security professional. I'm really more of a application developer, application architect type of person. And I come from this for many years of building enterprise-class systems, first using very old technologies like raw TCP and SunRPC, and then eventually, unfortunately, a technology you don't see much of anymore, the distributed computing environment, and eventually moving into things like J2E and web services and things like that. And sort of along the way, when you're building systems like that, you start worrying about security, and you learn a lot about security from looking at things such as distributed computing environment, Kerberos, and things like that. And just over time, I've learned a lot about security from building applications that had to be secure, and then related to that, I guess I have a fairly natural level of paranoia, which I guess makes me very interested in the security aspects of building systems. Now, I guess the question is, why should everybody worry about security? I think it's really kind of self-evident. The reality is that there's a lot of bad people out there, and those bad people are trying to break into our systems. If you don't make an effort to secure your systems, you're exposing yourself to a lot of quite egregious and potentially quite damaging types of attack. And, these attacks are getting more aggressive and more sophisticated. And it's therefore critical that you take the time and effort to protect your systems. Now, obviously, if what you're protecting isn't very valuable, you might spend less money protecting them. But the more valuable the information you're protecting, the more valuable the systems are, the more you need to put effort into protecting them, because there are plenty of really dangerous people out there trying to break into them. And as we see every day on the news, they're getting better and better at it.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting, Keith. And I'm really glad to hear about your background, because I think your background is going to be, very similar to a lot of people that are going to be listening to this series. So I wanted to get into the new version of the WebSphere application server. Specifically in version 7, one of the big enhancements in security was around security domains. Can you maybe talk or comment a little bit more about this feature and why it's useful?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. Basically, WebSphere, since the time immemorial, has had essentially one security configuration for the entire cell. So we supported, one user registry, one set of SSL configurations, one set of custom authorization plug points, which is called the JCC, Java Authorization Contract for Containers. And, that worked well and good, and it was fine. But what we found is that for very large customers, or maybe smaller customers with sort of complicated environments, they end up with these conflicting requirements. So they'll have 2 different applications, or maybe 10 different applications that all have the need for security, all want to run on WebSphere, but their requirements may conflict slightly. So, for example, one of the applications may want to use a custom authorization provider, while the other one may not. One application may want to use this LDAP directory. This other application may want to use something completely different, like a different LDAP, or maybe even an operating system registry, or who knows what else. There's lots of options in WebSphere. One application may have their own custom TAI, that's for customizing authentication, and another app may have a different one, or not want one, or whatever. And what ends up happening is, with these conflicting requirements, you either had to build a separate cell, or you had to get all the applications to work together, which of course is always a really hard problem, or you had to build some kind of common piece of infrastructure that sort of subsumed both sets of requirements. And, I'll be honest with you, I think ultimately the right thing to do is to try to rationalize these requirements, but, in the practical real world, where customers have to build real systems with finite amounts of money, that just hasn't always been possible. So in WebSphere 7, we now allow customers to deploy applications to the same cell with conflicting security requirements. So most, not all, but most of the security functionality is actually settable at what we call a security domain. So app 1 can use security domain 1, app 2 can use a completely different security domain, and they can have different configurations. And the most common one that I expect to see is going to be with respect to the registry. So these two apps could use different user populations. Maybe you have one app for one kind of customer, one app for a different kind of customer. Maybe for some reason they don't share a common registry. Now you'll be able to do that without having to contort your hands behind your back.
That's terrific, and it sounds like it's going to be a very useful feature for our customers. Along the same line and flavor, I've heard a lot of customers talk to us about the need to have fine-grained administrative security, and now we offer that in version 7. Can you go into what that is and why also it is important as well?
Certainly, and this is actually kind of interesting. This feature actually started in implementation in version 6.1, but was finished in version 7. The basic challenge that a lot of clients have is you have a very large production environment. You may have, 50 applications, 100 applications, dozens of application servers, hundreds of application servers. I mean, you can imagine different companies at different scale.
Right.
And in an environment like that, you tend to have a lot of different people administering the environment. Now, hopefully you don't have developers administering the environment, but you may well have different administrators that are perhaps authorized, or at least on paper, are only supposed to administer certain parts of the system. So these admins administer these applications, these admins administer those applications, and then, of course, there are obviously some very senior admins that, basically have overall control. Well, we've actually had customers implement that themselves by building their own administrative framework, this sort of separation of who can do what. Well, one of the big changes we added in 6.1 and again finished in 7 was the idea that we could actually provide that functionality out of the box in the product. The idea being is that in WebSphere, everything is divided up into a thing we call an access group, and basically access groups then control a coupling of people to resources. So you can say things like, these people can administer these application servers, these people can administer those application servers, these people can only administer, these applications, or even finer-grained kinds of things to do at the application level, server level, node level, cluster level, things like that. And the reason I talk about being 6.1 and 7 is that in 6.1 we added this functionality to WSAdmin. So customers who were prepared to write their own scripts could actually do everything in WSAdmin and benefit from this fine-grained security for administration. But the reality was you had to use WSAdmin for everything because the admin console didn't support this feature. But in 7, the admin console now does. So it's really cool. I mean, you can go into the admin console in version 7, and if you've got this all configured, it will show you a list of servers, and it'll tell you you have admin authority to this server, but you only have monitor authority for that server. So now we have this nice fine-grained ability to limit who can do what. So I can easily envision a situation where the senior administrator might create some servers, create some applications, things like that, and then he would delegate his task to more junior admins and say, okay, you can just start and stop this server, you can just update this application, things like that. So I actually really like this feature, and I'm very curious to see how much interest there's going to be in it.
That is really neat, and it sounds like that would probably also help with auditing as well.